With that, let's take it away.
All right. So welcome to VampChat with Dan and Eva, a podcast devoted to vampire fiction, fang folklore, and the gothic imagination. I'm Eva Vertreese, author of the Fury trilogy. Book 1, A Fury, is currently out, with Book 2, A Hellish Fury, coming later this year, so help me God.
And I'm Dan Plutstead, author of Fiona's Guardians, and its forthcoming sequel, which hopefully, hand God, will also be out this year.
So, Dan, we need to begin with a note for those who've been following us on social media and might still be catching up. So, earlier this month, we announced that we had scheduled Oscar-winning makeup artist V. Neal to join us. Unfortunately, V had a conflict and couldn't be with us last week, but I am thrilled to announce that V will join us next Tuesday, February 25th, to talk about her storied career and her vampire weekend, which is coming up.
Very exciting. Very exciting. It's great news. We are very much looking forward to speaking with V, especially about the vampire films she worked on. Again, that's next Tuesday, the 25th. Now, I want to tell you about what's coming up later this hour. We will speak with folklorist Michael Bell, who has published books and articles about vampire panics in New England. And in 1990, he was brought in to consult with archaeologists who discovered graves, one of which contained a corpse whose bones were rearranged into a literal skull and crossbones position. Folklorist Michael Bell will tell us more later this hour.
Ooh, I can't wait to hear that.
I am excited that our next guest has apparently entered the studio, and we were very excited for that. We have arrived at the fanged folklore part of our show, and Eva, I have long wanted to feature a segment about the New England vampire panics of the late 18th and 19th centuries. We know these coincided with outbreaks of tuberculosis, or as they called it back then, consumption. But those watching their relatives waste away and die suspected something more evil. And I found the perfect guest to walk us through these cases, a folklorist who published several books and articles on this topic.
Yeah, I was amazed to learn that one could get a job as a folklorist. I mean, how cool is that?
I know, right? With benefits and everything. Let's bring on Michael Bell, a former consulting folklorist at the Rhode Island Historical Preservation and Heritage Commission. Michael Bell, welcome to VampChat.
And Michael, you may have to unmute yourself, because I tried to unmute you and I can't. At the bottom, there's a little microphone, and so you're going to hit that.
Got it.
There you are.
Hear me now?
We hear you loud and clear.
Can you hear me now?
Welcome to VampChat.
Good. Yeah, how do you get a job as the folklorist? That's a secret.
So, Michael, you recently co-authored an article with Nicholas Bellantoni, who, along with you, investigated newly unearthed remains in Griswold, Connecticut. This was back in 1990 when Bellantoni was the state archaeologist, and he was called in after some kids found human skulls when they were sliding down a 50-foot knoll, and the soil had been cut away as part of a sand gravel operation, and this exposed a previously unknown burial ground. Finding the skulls was scary enough for the kids, I'm sure. But later, Bellantoni came face to face with something equally chilling as he looked into one end of a makeshift crypt. Can you describe what he saw?
Right. Well, this was burial number 4, which is the weird one that he told me about when he called me up on the phone and asked me if I'd like to come out to the Griswold cemetery site and look at what was going on there. Number 4 was the only one of the 29 burials that they excavated who had been put into a crypt with stone slabs lining both sides of the top of the coffin. So, I mean, they really did not want this guy leaving the grave. That was pretty obvious.
Wow.
And so I can summarize what Nick saw, Nick Bellantoni, but really I think you should read his own first-person account of it that was published 2 years ago in the Bulletin of the Archaeological Society of Connecticut, because it's his first-person account that really reads like a thrilling mystery. So I wouldn't do it many favors by repeating it word for word, but I can summarize it. As he started going into this crypt, which is on the edge of the gravel mining operation that was sliding down the slope. And that's what revealed the cemetery in the first place, where those skulls rolled out and surprised those three boys. Yeah. So he looks into it and he says, what I should be seeing is like the top, of the skull. Mm-hmm. Because it should be, head to the east, facing west, as in most Christian burials, waiting for the time when Christ will come again and we will all ascend to heaven. But he said, that's not what I saw. I saw actually a skull looking back at me. A face. I said, this was really weird because it's way in the wrong position. And as they kept excavating, he discovered that not only was the skull in the wrong place, but the two long bones, the femurs, had also been removed and then placed over the chest in kind of a cross bones style. And on top of those, the skull had been placed. So he said, this is really weird. This is not like anything I've ever seen.
And it's actually when the investigation changes from being an archaeological dig to an anthropological case. And that's when you got the call to come to the site. What was your initial take after seeing this disarranged skeleton?
Well, JB was burial number 4, and he was called JB because on his coffin in brass tacks had been spelled out the letters, initials JB and also 55, which presumably was his initials and also his age at the time of his death. So he had already been removed, so I went out on the site. I saw where he had been exhumed, and I saw lots of photographs that Nick had taken. And I said, okay, it's obvious. They already knew that he had been exhumed sometime after burial. And they had a hint of that even before they got to see his skull looking back at them, because they had found some of the vertebra and other smaller bones outside the coffin, would say, well, how would that happen? Maybe animals coming in and out, disturbing things. But then seeing the skull and crossbones pattern pretty well nailed that this was done deliberately. He had been exhumed. And I said, well, this fits what I know about, at that time, what I knew about the vampire tradition. Because what's interesting is that Paul Slezak, who is a forensic anthropologist, had analyzed the rib bones and found that they had scars or lesions on them, which indicated the presence of a chronic pulmonary disease of some sort, probably tuberculosis. But in any event, it would be interpreted as consumption by the people at that place and at that time. And so this guy, JB, had consumption. He was buried. Maybe 10 years or so later, he was dug up, his bones were rearranged, and then he was reburied. Well, why would they do that? The best conclusion that the three of us, Nick and Paul and I, could come up with was that people in his community were dying of consumption, and to stop it, they performed the folk ritual, which was to go to the cemetery and start exhuming bodies of dead relatives until they found one that looked like it was not completely dead. So what were they looking for? Mainly they were looking for what they considered fresh blood in the heart or other organs. Fresh meaning to them liquid. So if they found liquid blood in any of the organs, that pretty much nailed that this is the one that they had to perform a ritual with to get rid of this plague.
Interesting.
I think in the case of JB, he was probably pretty much decomposed, and I think that's why his ribs had been misplaced also, as well as his thigh bones and his head. They were out of order, and I think they were probably maybe looking for signs, the vital organs, signs that they had liquid blood in them. And not finding that, they turned to plan B. And folklore always has a plan B and sometimes a plan C and a D. And so what they did was just rearrange his head and his legs so that he couldn't come out of the grave. That's the way to keep. That's one folk method for keeping a corpse confined to the grave.
Interesting. Well, you write that a community's response to a suspected evil spirit or vampire has 4 stages: inaugural, followed by diagnostic, transformational, and healing. So can you take us through each of these steps and what they entail?
Sure. Now, I'm looking at this folk ritual as a play or a dramatic, a drama. So it's got a script, it's got performers or actors. And the script of this consumption ritual begins with the inaugural act, which is where the ritual's practitioners confront the corpse, or sometimes corpses, who had died of consumption. Exhumation is almost always the first inaugural act, but sometimes a corpse may be examined prior to actual burial. Then the next act is a diagnostic one, where the practitioners try to determine whether a corpse is or is not a threat to the living. So usually they're looking for signs that indicate a corpse is not completely dead. As I said, especially liquid blood in the heart or other vital organs. So once they find that, then they have to perform the transformational act, which is to eliminate or at least neutralize the threat. The most common transformational act is burning the heart and other vital organs sometimes. In some cases, such as the one in Jewett City in 1854, which is only about 2 miles from where J.B. was buried, the entire corpse was burned. In a case in Plymouth, Massachusetts in 1807, the corpse was simply turned face down and reburied. Now that to me is the neatest, daintiest way to do it. But I think the point here is that variation, as we see in these transformational acts, is really a distinguishing feature of all folklore. So I think we're dealing with folk practices here. And finally, the healing act is performed to restore the well-being of those who are afflicted. To complete the cure, ill family members might be instructed to inhale or be fumigated by the smoke from a burning corpse, like they did in Foster, Rhode Island in 1827, or to ingest the ashes from the incinerated vital organs, as they did in Exeter, Rhode Island in 1892. So to date, I've documented about 85 of these ritual performances in New England and in neighboring states.
That's an astonishing number of cases to have to go through. In a few minutes, we definitely want to talk about efforts to identify the remains with the initials JB, who we were talking about earlier, the ribs, the femurs crossed over his chest, and inverted skull. Also an adolescent labeled NB and a woman labeled IB. But first, I would like you to immerse us in the point of view of an 18th or 19th century person who sees his loved ones grow increasingly weak from something nobody can see, and then who die after bouts of coughing up blood. Right. How logical is it that these people would blame something supernatural?
Well, I think it's not scientifically rational, but it's reasonable given what they knew and the situations that they were facing. You have to remember during this time, consumption, as tuberculosis, pulmonary tuberculosis was called, had no known cause, and so it had no known cure. So imagine that you're a member of a family, and several family members have died, and you've seen this happen in other families in your communities. So you know what's coming next. They're going to basically keep dying. You go to the doctor. Of course, the doctor, if he's honest, he'll say, well, it's in God's hand. She has consumption. There's nothing more we can do. So are you going to give up? Well, there's an old folk ritual that we've talked about that was available in many of these communities. And so that's what many of these families did. It's a last resort. But when you're out of options, this was really, I would say, a life ring in a sea of despair.
Mm.
Yeah. Well, at some point, the word vampire enters the narrative, but it doesn't appear to be from local people at the time. So how do vampires or suspected vampires creep into this story?
Well, yeah, you're right. The people who participated in these rituals did not use the word vampire when they talked about these events. And even in the stories of outsiders, the word was rarely used. It only occurs in 12 out of the 85 examples that I found. That's just 7%.
Wow.
And the word first appeared in New England consumption stories in 1842. And that's 58 years after the first, thus far anyway, documented ritual in the region, which I found was in 1784. And furthermore, I think of 8 of the 12 outsider narratives in which the word vampire does appear, 8 of the 12, that appeared in 1885 or later. So I think you could say that the word vampire as a word arrived late in New England and pretty much stayed in the shadows.
Where they're most comfortable.
Yeah, exactly. I didn't want to put too much spin on that.
Too fine a point on that, right?
Oh, go ahead.
Right.
Go ahead. And
Right.
Because that's our favorite show and one of our favorite movies. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, look, here's a question. If insiders had blamed consumption on a corpse that physically left its grave, perhaps to suck the blood and kill the living, don't you think they would have given this thing a name or a label? I mean, I do.
Yeah.
But they didn't. They didn't. And so what they didn't say actually tells us a lot. So there's no evidence that the people who performed the rituals imagined or visualized the deadly link between the living and the dead as some sort of a tangible, discrete thing or monster. The best way to describe it, and some of the outside commentators did describe it this way, is that the theory seemed to be there was some sort of a sympathetic connection between the living and the dead. Sympathetic meaning it acted at a distance.
Mm-hmm.
So what the nature of that connection was up in the air. And I think the people involved didn't really care or think about it that much. They were just concerned as, what do I have to do to stop this? Just tell me what to do and I'll do it. Yeah. You know, they weren't interested in the theories. Oh, well, how did Mercy become a vampire? And geez, we didn't even use that term. So what are we talking about? What they were talking about basically was a folk ritual, not some sort of a theory of what happens to people after they die. They did wonder, and sometimes out loud, was it possible for the dead to prey on the living? But that is about as far as the local people went in trying to identify exactly what they were dealing with. It was just some evil spirit had gotten inside the corpse, inhabited maybe the heart or other vital organs, and maintained some semblance of a life by sapping the life from a distance of living family members. And
so, Michael, I'm curious with that thought. So you have these rituals. Where did these rituals come from? I mean, what was the if it wasn't for suspected, vampires or the dead walking, what were the original rituals meant to do?
My hypothesis is that it came from Europe, because there's no doubt this is a version of a European tradition, the vampire tradition. So when outsiders called it vampirism, they were not incorrect. But I think it came to New England over a period of years at different times and in different places. And I would say I've got evidence that some so-called foreign quack doctors were making the rounds in the Northeast, selling cures. And one of the cures being sold in Willington, Connecticut in 1784 by somebody who was called a foreign quack doctor was to exhume the bodies of dead relatives, look for a vine that was growing from the heart or other vital organs, and then together with the vital organs, cut that vine and burn it to ashes. And this foreign quack doctor actually convinced Isaac Johnson, who lived in Willington at the time, to do this. So to me, that's a strong hint that it was probably brought here by people who knew about this ritual in Europe, and they came here, and what they were selling was a quick cure.
Exploiting it, yeah.
They weren't selling an entire vampire tradition from Europe. You know, because I knew that what these Yankees wanted was just, hey, give me what I have to do, and don't bother me with all that other stuff. Just tell me what I got to do to get rid of this disease, and I'll do it.
Yeah,
And
all
so
this
I think it was
history or whatever. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I think it came here with them, and then after it came here, then it became part of folklore, which means it spread from one community to the next. People would say, "Oh yeah, this happened over there, and here's what you do." And I have good evidence of how that happened, you know, by people who were moving from one location to the other, or visiting from another town or another county, saying, "Oh, well, here's what we did when we had this problem," and then they would tell people, you know, explain the ritual to people.
This latest research that you're doing, will this be in a forthcoming article or book soon?
Actually, the 85 cases that I've discovered till now are in a book that was published last year.
Okay, this is Vampire's Grasp, which
Yes.
we will be talking about. Yeah.
Yes.
Before we get to that, however, I can't help comparing past responses to epidemics with more recent ones. As you know, during modern epidemics, there's a medical, scientific, and government response, and then the wider public's response. Peering through the lens of anthropology and folklorology, what do past outbreaks show us about the way people today react to a deadly disease?
Well, what it shows me is let's not break our arms, patting ourselves on our backs over how smart we are. I mean, I start Vampire's Grasp, my newest book, by introducing the whole idea, by talking about the recent COVID epidemic. And folklorists have already been on top of that. And there are now books and articles written by folklorists about the COVID epidemic and what folk cures started popping up. So we have the same thing. People didn't know what was going on. They were afraid. Fear generates an opening for other alternate sources of cure. And that's where the quacks step in. You know, the people who pass themselves off as medical practitioners, but they're not trained. They don't have the background, and basically they're just trying to make money off of people. And that happened during COVID.
So grinding up a heart, burning it into ashes, and ingesting the ashes was the ivermectin of its time?
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, that was because it was a folk tradition. There are variants of that, like burning the entire corpse, and sometimes having people inhale the smoke or be fumigated by the burning smoke. But again, it's almost like an inoculation. I mean, it's, as I said, it's reasonable. It may not be rational in a scientific sense, but it makes sense. There's a logic to it.
Mm-hmm. All right, so it's time for the big reveal. Who is or was JB, NB, and IB?
Who were they? Well, I can tell you that initial DNA analysis of JB's remains revealed only a generalized European lineage, but newer technology has now identified a matching surname, and this is pretty exciting. Barber.
Oh, nice.
Okay, so we know it was probably J. Barber. And further research has located an obituary in the Norwich, Connecticut Courier from 1826. The obituary is for a 12-year-old boy named Nathan Barber, son of John Barber, who died in Griswold in July of 1826. So the grave near JB's, containing the coffin with NB13, on the lid, that might well be this Nathan Barber, who died during his 13th year. And NB could be, we don't have a name for N, could be John's wife or maybe another female relative. So, and also I think it's interesting that there was a map from this county in 1854 that shows a house site for a J. Barber near the Walton Cemetery, which is the cemetery in Griswold where he was interred. So we can say probably John Barber, and I think new evidence keeps coming to light. So I'm sure that this pretty extraordinary story will continue to evolve.
No, yeah.
I like that it's still ongoing. Yeah.
That's what I love about all of these, really. They never die. They're vampires.
Well, and it's also the CSI that keeps going. There's no season ending.
Yes,
yeah,
right.
Yeah. Now, Michael, you mentioned your latest book, which came out in 2024, called Vampire's Grasp, The Hidden History of Consumption in New England. Right. And right on your book's cover is the headstone of Mercy Brown.
Right.
A Rhode Island woman who died in 1892 at age 19.
Right.
Hers is one of the best documented cases of exhumations and rituals to banish an evil spirit, or let's call it a vampire. Right. Her mother, Mary Eliza, died of consumption, followed by the oldest daughter, Mary Olive.
Yep.
And then Mercy contracted the disease along with her brother Edwin.
Right.
After Mercy died, her father only had Edwin left, and he agreed to allow the bodies of his wife and 2 daughters to be exhumed. Describe how Mercy's corpse appeared different and therefore suspect.
Okay, well, Mercy, number one, she wasn't really exhumed. She had died in January of 1892, and she'd been placed in the above-ground crypt in the cemetery on Chestnut Hill in Exeter, because obviously at that time, at least, the soil was too frozen for anyone with picks and shovels. They didn't have backhoes to dig a grave. So she was waiting for the spring thaw. So when they went there in March, on March 17th to be exact, of 1892, they did not have to exhume her. They exhumed her mother and her oldest sister, Mary Olive. But she was just taken out of the crypt. And there was a medical examiner, actually a medical doctor, who was the examiner for the towns of Exeter and the adjacent town of North Kingstown, Dr. Harold Metcalf. He reluctantly agreed to be on the scene. And I think it's notable that George Brown, the father, and Edwin, who was sick at that time and they were trying to save, they were notably absent at the cemetery during the ritual. So anyway, when the body of Mercy Lena, she was called Lena, was taken out, she appeared to be fresh. And Dr. Metcalf goes, well, yeah. I mean, I don't know if his exact words, but I'm sure he says, well, no kidding. No, duh. She's been out here for 3 months and frozen, so yeah. Well, the attendants weren't hearing that, so they decided they had to perform the ritual. So they cut her heart out and also the liver, both being deemed well preserved, and they burned them on a nearby rock. And Edwin, as a cure, was supposed to drink the ashes in water, but no one could or would say if he actually did, so I don't know. But sadly, the hoped-for cure did not work for Edwin. He died March 2nd, just a few weeks shy of his 25th birthday. And also, there were 3 other remaining Brown children, all females, who died of consumption within a few years. So basically, it took the whole family except for one daughter, Hattie Brown, and the father, George T. Brown. He lived to be the ripe old age of 80.
Wow.
Yeah. Eva, did you have anything before I would
No,
continue?
Go
Okay. Michael, it is surprising that Mercy's body was treated in such a way when America was changing rapidly during that time. Right. The 1890s was the Gilded Age. Technology is advancing, railroads and everything, along with scientific knowledge. One would think that we'd moved beyond these kinds of beliefs and practices, but they persisted. Why?
Well, several reasons. One, people were not even aware that tuberculosis was caused by a germ until 1882, so 10 years before Mercy's exhumation. And even then, Edward Cook's, the German scientist who discovered the germ, his findings weren't taken seriously for a long time. And also, even once it was finally accepted that, yes, this is how consumption gets started, tuberculosis, there was no cure. There was not a cure until, 1942? When streptomycin was invented. So even if people knew scientifically, theoretically, what was killing them, there was still no actual cure available. And what they did was just separate people, which they'd been doing for hundreds of years anyway, quarantining people, keeping them away from other people so it didn't spread. So there was still no cure. And besides, I think, people in the country, like Exeter was pretty much a country town back then, it still is, the word didn't get around. Maybe they didn't even know that it was caused by a germ.
So being that isolated kind of exacerbated the problem, I guess you could say.
Right. Mm-hmm. At one time, folklorists would call that the archaism of the fringe, meaning the further away you get from so-called civilization, then the more likely you are to retain older lore and traditions and beliefs. Because you're not there at the center, you're not at the hub. You're not in Boston, which was called the hub.
Interesting. If you're just joining us, we're speaking with folklorist Michael Bell. Michael, stay with us while we tease our next episode of VampChat. And Dan, we'll be joined by a member of Hollywood horror royalty.
Oh, we will. We have rescheduled our interview with Oscar-winning makeup artist V. Neal. And V will join us next Tuesday, February 25th, to talk about her storied career and her vampire weekend, which is next month.
Again, that'll be next Tuesday, starting at 7 p.m. Eastern Time here on Podbean. All right, Michael Bell, back to you. During VampChat, we ask each of our guests the same 4 vampy questions. Dan, you want to begin?
Yeah, I do. Michael Bell, who is your favorite vampire of all time and why?
Okay, that changes frequently.
Oh, that's a first.
Because my favorite vampire is the one I'm researching and writing about at the moment. Okay?
That's fair, yeah.
So currently, I would have to say that would be Samuel Soliday, whose corpse was exhumed during the winter of 1815-16 in Portsmouth, Ohio. That's southeastern Ohio, just across the Ohio River from Kentucky.
Interesting.
So that's what I'm writing about now. So it's not New England, but the families did come from New England, and so I've found even the people that were involved in New England rituals moving to Ohio and bringing it with them.
Interesting. Is that North?
We will definitely have you on the show when you've got your next book about that.
Yeah,
okay.
Absolutely. Is that north of Maysville?
Well, Portsmouth is in the...
Okay.
Yeah, it's on the bend of the river. It's on this... Yeah.
Okay, awesome. So what vampire power do you wish you had?
Invisibility.
It's a useful one.
Is that okay?
That's good.
Very practical.
No, it's all okay.
Well, of course it's practical. Who doesn't want to be the fly on the wall? And besides, there's a magical black cat bone in African American folklore that if you put it in your mouth, you become invisible. And so what can you do? You go into a bank and just say, oh, don't have to say anything. Just take the money.
There are some old blues songs. I mean, like the early 20s
yes.
or,
the black cat bone.
Yeah.
Well, we have to ask you, Michael, are you Team Louis or Team Lestat?
All right, I've got a confession here, okay?
Mm-hmm.
I had to go to the internet to figure out what the heck you were asking. Okay, so here's a confession. I started reading Rice's second vampire novel, I guess was
The Vampire
Lestat.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I couldn't finish it.
Oh.
So, I know. It's just they're going to be driving stakes through me here. But for the most part, fictional romanticized vampires don't hold my interest for long. I find the vampires of history and folklore fascinating enough to really take much of my time.
So we will mark you as voting present.
yeah, just like certain members of Congress.
So
don't want to make a commitment here.
So the final question is, would you want to be turned into a vampire, and if so, why?
No. Okay.
There we go.
No, number one, I don't like hurting people. So
That's what Manuel said just a moment ago.
Oh, did he? Okay, so they have to hurt people to live forever. And besides, I wouldn't want to live forever because, believe me, I'm like 81 years old and it's getting boring, tiring. I have a friend who interviewed for some work he was doing a lot of people who had reached the age of 100. And he said, almost to a person, they said, I'm ready to go.
Oh, yeah.
So imagine being a vampire. Yeah.
That actually does play in a lot of vampire narratives. We've seen films certainly,
right?
Where
exactly.
There's there's a feeling of ennui, as the centuries pass.
Exactly.
Get
me out of this place.
Well, Michael Bell, thank you so much for joining us for just a fascinating conversation. Where can our listeners find your latest book, Vampire's Grasp?
In all the regular places, I guess you would say, online. Amazon, Borders.
Do you have a hometown independent bookstore that maybe you'd like people to order it from?
I don't. I've got to say the publisher hasn't really been publicizing the book as much as I think they should or could. It's probably up to me. That's the way that publishing works these days.
Well, I wrote a book about that.
Yeah.
We need to
There
talk.
you go. I'm going to have to read it. Is it available Is it available?
It's probably available. I would love for it to be available in your hometown independent bookstore, but we'll talk later.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So, Michael, 2 questions. When are you expected to finish your new book? And where can we learn more about you and any upcoming events you have?
Okay, well, I'm writing an article now, the one on the Saladay Portsmouth vampire. It's for a journal.
Okay.
The Journal of Vampire Studies. The new book I've been researching is not vampires. The tentative title is Buried Alive in America, Fact, Fiction, and Folklore.
Oh, I like that.
Very interesting.
Believe me, I found hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. It's amazing, the stories.
This is why I'm being cremated.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. That's what a lot of people did for that reason. I'm not kidding you.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Well,
but you can find me at Vampire's Grasp on Facebook or Food for the Dead, which is the title of my first book. You can actually just search that on the internet, Food for the Dead.
Okay. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you so much. We appreciate you coming on.
And please come back on the show. We really want to have you back.
Will. Thank you. It's been fun.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael.
Mm-hmm.
Good night.
Bye.
Well, Eva, that was just a really cool conversation.
I know it was. Yeah.
Okay, there's a lot in there. Yeah, we're still absorbing. We're still processing everything we've heard.
Well, there's so much because I mean, you think about it, not realizing that the word vampire came in late, and then having this whole what you think is people pulling from their their history and their lore, but in reality, it very well may have been charlatans coming in and using that lore in order to sell snake oils. And I mean, it's a very interesting dynamic that's happening and fascinating study.
It really is. And I encourage everybody listening to read Michael Bell's articles and his books that really kind of lays this out in such a layered way as well. It's just fascinating reading.
It really is.
Okay, it is time for us to reveal what vampire video content we've been consuming. And Eva, you've been rewatching a 1970s film that puts the K9 in extended canines.
Okay, Dan. I have a confession to make.
Ooh, shall we call a priest? Do you want a rosary?
Possibly. Let me start by saying that in 1979, we had the original release of Salem's Lot. We also had the release of Count Dracula starring Frank Langella.
Good movie.
And what can I say? I was on a vampire high. I was 9 years old and I was scarfing up all the vampire content I could possibly find. Looking back, I now realize that 9-year-old Eva really hadn't been alive long enough to cultivate any kind of taste, let alone good. So, there were some good choices in movies. There were definitely some excellent choices in movies. But there were also some pretty pathetic ones too. But looking at it through that, 9-year-old lens, they were all like great. And that's where my review of Dracula's dog, aka Zoltan, Hound of Dracula, begins. God help me. All right.
God help us all.
Oh, God. So the movie was filmed in Europe in 1977, and it made its U.S. debut in 1978. It was directed by Albert Band. Now, I saw it in 1979, obviously. Okay, here we go. It opens with a Romanian army who accidentally blasts open a crypt. Upon investigation of said crypt, they discovered that this crypt is for 6 members, get this, of the Dracula family. Because one stone, there's 6 crypts, one stone reads Mikhail Dracula, 1777 to 1883. And another reads Count Igor Dracula, 1680 to 1927.
Wow. When one Dracula isn't enough,
Oh yeah, this is the whole family. I love it's not Count Dracula, it's Igor Dracula. Okay. So the head officer says, I'll tell headquarters we need an archaeologist. And they all leave except for one lonely guard who obviously drew the short straw. Now, it's worth noting that everyone has an American accent in this film, despite the fact that this part is set in Transylvania.
Yeah, they could have dubbed it, I suppose, but no.
Oh, my God. So they assign this poor guard to watch for the night. And oddly enough, it's the exact night when an earthquake happens. Coincidence?
Yeah.
I think not. After a couple of tremors, during which the guard climbs up the stairs to leave, and then he decides to come back down. I don't know why. The earthquake causes one of the lower crypts to open, and this casket comes flying out of it. Of course, the guard opens it, only to find a shrouded body with a wooden stake jammed into it. Now, Dan, what do you think the guard does while you're screaming at the screen for him not to do?
It drives me crazy when they do this. He pulls out the stake, doesn't he?
Exactly. He then, of course, begins inspecting the stake. And what do you think happens next?
I'm guessing the shrouded figure starts breathing?
Oh, my God. Have you seen this movie?
No, but I got lucky. We'll just say.
Well, you're good, along with every other listener to this podcast. So, yes, it inflates and starts breathing. But the coffin isn't one of the Draculas. So instead, the coffin is Zoltan's. He's a solid black Doberman pinscher. And Zoltan leaps from the coffin, knocks the soldier over, and then walks over and, bites him on the neck with his large Dracula-like canine.
As one does.
So, okay, so now after his drink, his first drink in a very, very long time, Zoltan, I love this, Zoltan takes a moment, and we get a flashback scene of Zoltan as a young Doberman at an inn where he lived with his owner, Veit Schmidt, played by Reggie Nalder, by the way. I mean,
from Salem's Lot.
Yeah, from Salem's Lot. The actors in this thing are awesome. I have no idea. We'll get to that in a minute. Okay, so it's a quiet evening at the inn, and all of a sudden Zoltan starts barking. Veit releases him from his tie, and Zoltan races into action, stopping Igor Dracula from biting a young woman. And he chases him into the woods, only for them to stop in this field, and they're staring at each other. And Igor transforms into a bat and just starts biting Zoltan on the neck.
The thanks you get for being a good watchdog. Good boy.
I know, right? So they both return back to the inn, where Igor then turns Veit into a half vampire and day-walking servant. Okay, you with me so far?
Like a hellhound on your trail.
Okay, so now we cut back to Zoltan in the crypt. He notices one other vault that has been opened. He goes over to it, and with his powerful canine teeth, he pulls the casket out, opens the lid, and like a good boy, he removes the stake from the shrouded figure. And who do you think it is?
I would like to think I had an idea, but I just don't.
It's Veit. And you know what?
I can't imagine.
Zoltan and Veidt can communicate through telepathy.
Yeah.
So we
Jumping the shark here.
we get this nugget of insight when Smith transmits, "We must find our new master," to Zoltan without moving his lips. It's awesome. So now, just a quick side note. I did observe one issue with the script that was never addressed. See, Zoltan and Veidt, they decide to go in search of their new master instead of opening the remaining crypts and bringing back their old ones. So I have to guess that they didn't really like Igor very much.
Okay.
I mean, it seems like a hole in the plot, but I mean, God, who are we kidding? There's so freaking many. So, okay, so Zoltan and Veidt leave the crypt. Now, cut to the next morning when the army squad returns to find the poor bloodless soldier. There's a female officer, Major Hessel, and a civilian police liaison, Inspector Bronco, who is actually played by Jose Ferrer. So
another great actor.
Yeah. Okay, and they discuss the uncovering of the Dracula tomb. And the coffins have been removed, and the first of the still full coffins is opened, revealing yet another staked figure. So they close that coffin quickly, and they move to the two empty coffins. Now, on a side note, I don't know why it didn't burst into flames when they opened the coffin, but, I digress. So one of the empty ones is identified as Veidt Smith. They don't know who was in the second empty coffin, though. But we do.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, Inspector Bronco and Major Hessel are talking about how there's only one living relative left to the Dracula line, and that person is in America, to which they just happen to have his personal address handy, and they read it out loud. And it's then decided that Inspector Bronco needs to go there and warn him. And where is Veidt? Well, he's hiding and taking all the mental notes that he can. He's got this guy's address. He's got his name. He's got everything. Okay, so the burning question at this point is, how do you get a vampire dog to America?
Oh, the paperwork, really. No, I have no idea. How do you?
Okay, I'll tell you. By boat. You put him in a doggy coffin, box him up, and make up a story that the dog's owner wants him to be buried in America after he dies overseas. Now, how this passes through customs,
yeah,
I will never know. It was the 70s, though. So they open the box, open the coffin, feel under the dead dog, call it all good, and send them on their way. I mean, again, why didn't he burst into flames? I don't know.
Exposed to sunlight. Right, yeah.
No x-rays. No, you try to do that now through customs and see how well you get. Okay. So now we get to the good stuff. Loving family, husband Michael Drake, who was actually played by Michael Pataki, another good actor.
Yep.
Wife Marla, two kids, Libby and John, and two beautiful German shepherds, Samson and Annie, who just had two puppies. All decide to go on a vacation to their favorite lake. I mean, what the hell could go wrong with this plot?
Yeah, I mean, maybe does the plot improve a little bit?
Oh, God, just wait. Now, there is a tense scene where Zoltan almost gets his new master at the house, but Samson, being the good dog that he is, saves him, and then the next day they all pile into the camper and they're off. Okay, so at the campsite, and I love when they show the camper just driving down the road and the music's playing, it's so cute. So at the campsite, things start going downhill. One of the puppies disappears, and he's found dead in a boat. Now, I'll give you a hint. It was Zoltan.
Mm.
And so they bury, he's buried by the grieving family. Two other campers lose their dog Scout. He disappears. I'll give you another hint. It was Zoltan. And ultimately, Annie disappears too.
Wait,
who was it? Another hint.
Who do you think it was?
It was Zoltan. So he's busy creating his own little pack of vampire dogs, and I'm telling you what, it's awesome because, he mesmerizes them, and then he just casually walks up and sinks his canine fangs into their neck. It's so freaking funny.
Oh man.
Okay, so Inspector Bronco shows up right as the family is ready to pack in, this vacation from hell, and he tells Michael all about the crypt, how he's the last in the line of the Draculas, and ultimately convinces him to stay and fight with him. They also figure that there's a dog with him and that the dog must be also the vampire. Now, I'm not going to give away the rest of this film, but I have to tell you, about my favorite part of the movie. It's this very tense night where Bronco and Michael are trapped in this small hunting lodge, and there's 3 vampire dogs attacking it all night. And, the next morning, at one point I thought I was going to look, because it goes from like the door to the window to the ceiling where Zoltan's up there trying to get in through the roof, and it goes to the door to the ceiling so it's like back and forth. And in a second I was expecting them to like pan over to a table and like the guys are playing Go Fish or something like that. It's just this insanely long evening. And the next morning, the shed looked scratched and beaten all to pieces. And I swear to you, all I could think about was, how do you turn this into your homeowner's insurance?
Oh, my God.
So I'll end this review by saying this was a very low-budget film. I swear, I honestly can't believe they got the actors that they did. Someone called in some really huge favors here. The acting is cheesy. The gore is even cheesier. This isn't even a B movie. We're somewhere in the second half of the alphabet to properly categorize this.
Gosh, yeah.
That said, I can't help but go back to my 9-year-old self, who watched this with enough wonderment and glee of a child, who still to this day remembers how much I loved this movie. And I have to ask, what the hell were you thinking?
Wow, yeah, I want to know, yeah. But, okay, here on VampChat, we have a rating system. And that's 1 to 20 drops of blood, with 20 being the highest. Eva, how much blood will you spill for Dracula's dog?
Okay, I'm a dog lover, all right? I will confess I have 9 of them, okay? So I'm going to give 1 drop of blood in memory and honor of each faithful companion who met their fate at the hands of Zoltan.
Oh, that's so sweet.
Yes, I'm going to give 1 for Scout, who was just trying to be a good guard dog. I'm going to give a second one for Annie. It's hard enough being a mom of 2 puppies, let alone to be tricked into a loveless relationship with an evil Doberman, right? I'm going to give a 3rd for Samson, who resisted the temptation and kept his distance up to the very end until he fell prey to Zoltan's hypnosis. And I'm even going to give a 4th one in memory of Zoltan, who had his mortal soul ripped away just for doing a good deed. God.
Being a good watchdog. Yeah.
And finally, I'm going to give a 5th drop of blood for the poor helpless baby that only wanted to wander the campsite in search of fun. It wasn't his fault that Zoltan, went against Vite and decided to have a midnight snack. And, now he lays in the cold ground. His short life ended. Or does he?
Ooh, a sequel. Are we talking about a sequel, Eva?
Oh, God, I hope not.
Okay, I counted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 drops of blood out of 20. Again, 20 being the highest. Did I miss any drops of blood there?
No, you didn't. There's a lot.
We started this show in late August 21st, I think. And we have never had a review, a score in the single digits of drops of blood.
Now,
this is the first time.
I know. Now, hold on. There is a place for low budget cheesy films like this, and it might deserve a few more drops of blood on that front. Okay. Some of the effects were cool. Zoltan's glowing eyes, and they actually put powder on the dogs to make them look creepier. Okay. And, I don't know.
Maybe it would be better if we were comparing the best of the worst films. Like this is the Plan 9 of outer space of vampire dog films or something like this. Maybe it would score higher.
In the case of worst, best or worst, okay, it would score higher because I have seen worse. There was this one show that had a husband and wife in a boat. I don't even remember the name of this movie, and if somebody out there knows it, I would love to find it. But it was like the beginning dialogue was, "It's a beautiful night, Mrs. Jones," and then it was like, "It surely is, Mr. Jones." And it was a horror movie, and this opening scene was horrible. That's the worst. So it does rank higher than that. If you were really high and had a terrible week, this movie would not be so bad.
Okay. All right. Spark one or two, and then, sit back and watch Dracula's Dog. And you tell us how many drops of blood you would give it.
Yeah.
I feel like we've missed an opportunity here. If only, we had the soundtrack, if the soundtrack to the movie included Atomic Dog by Parliament Funkadelic, or perhaps I could have played that underneath your review. That would have just totally worked.
I can't even say the soundtrack was very good because it was all instrumental. I mean, there's, if it's, I have to say this, if I was surfing and I won't call this a 2 a.m.er, but if it was like 3, 4 a.m. in the morning, I had insomnia, absolutely couldn't sleep, and I was flipping through and there was nothing else on TV and I came across this one, I would probably rewatch it. But otherwise, forget it. I'm done.
Yeah.
I've crossed out that memory from my history, and I don't know what was wrong with me.
And thus endeth our review of Dracula's Dog. Thank you, Eva, for that. That was a very entertaining review, actually.
It was
probably
worth
more
it
entertaining
for
than
that.
the film.
It was worth it for that.
Okay. Well, that is our show. Be sure to join us next Tuesday, February 25th, for our rescheduled interview with the legendary Hollywood makeup artist V. Neal.
Dan, I love how this is turning out to be an epic season, and we really do have some major announcements coming for VampChat in the coming weeks.
Yes, definitely an epic season, but it would be even more epicer if we had a sponsor. We want to keep improving VampChat.
And improvements do require outside investment. So if you want to inform our rapidly growing audience, and it really is rapidly growing, about your business or upcoming event,
this is a great opportunity for those looking to reach folks who consume all things vampire and who are more likely to attend events geared toward their fellow creatures of the night.
To sponsor VampChat, email us at vampchatwithdanandeva@gmail.com or reach out to us on Facebook or Instagram, and we look forward to introducing your business or event to our audience.
All right, children of the night, we wish you safe dreams.
Just keep an eye open for those creatures of the night.
And if you can't sleep, we have vampire books to recommend. Be sure to sink your teeth into Eva's novel, A Fury.
Or this might be a perfect night to devour Dan's novel, Fiona's Guardians.
And with that,
we bid you
good night. Good night, Eva.
Good night, Dan.